Hello and welcome to Transplant Garden. Today I'd like to talk to you about how to keep your canna plants happy and healthy when growing them indoors. When growing your canna indoors, you can control some key aspects like light, temperature, and watering frequency. Watering frequency is really important in canna plants. For example, when you're growing outside, you could have watering issues depending on what sort of weather pattern you're in. If it's extremely hot and dry, you could bake your canna plant. On the other hand, if you're in a rainy season, you could waterlog your plants. Canna is very susceptible to root rot, which is why it's important to allow your soil to have a chance to dry out between waterings. Being indoors allows you to control the frequency of waterings, and a surprise rainstorm could absolutely drench your plant. So let's talk about knowing when to water when you're growing your canna indoors. My favorite way to test the soil moisture levels is pretty easy. You just take a few toothpicks and dunk the toothpick in the soil. Try to go pretty far down. Notice how I punctured the soil far away from the plant. I don't want to be skewering too many of the canna's roots or even any parts of the stem. So I always put my toothpick in pretty far away from the base of the plant. So I leave it in there for 15, 20, maybe 30 seconds, and I pull it out. Alright, can you see how sandy that is? So the sand indicates that there's some moisture in the soil still because it wet the toothpick and then the sand stuck to it. Alright, now we do the second toothpick and we wait. You can also, if you have enough space in your pot, kind of stick your finger in knuckle deep. You never want to just go off what the surface of your soil looks like because the surface could dry out and then you're not really sure what the below levels look like. So the lower levels could hold humidity for a little bit longer. Alright, let's check our other toothpick. Alright, this one came out clean. You see that? There's maybe a few specks on there. But you can sort of see the difference between, here, I'll pick up this one too. Come on, focus. Yeah, you can really see the difference between the two there. Alright, this plant had the toothpick come out dry. I should water it, right? Well, maybe not. So, if the toothpick came out dry, and the leaves are looking fine, they're not wilting or anything like that, you could wait a few days. Since these are desert plants in the Horn of South Africa, they can wait a while before you need to actually water them again. So it's a good idea to let your soil dry out a good amount before you water again. That ensures that you don't run into root rot. Now we'll talk a little bit more about what root rot is and how to combat it. I want to take a second here to talk about root rot, and to do that, I'm going to be using my hydroponic canna. So hydroponic means growing purely in a water and nutrient solution, so the roots are always in contact with water. Now, I know I just talked about not overwatering your canna, so how can you grow a canna in a hydroponic setup? Well, hydroponic setups always are circulating their water, so they're re-oxygenating their water that the plant is coming in contact with. Now, with soil, that's not really what happens, and water isn't actually the cause of root rot. The cause of root rot is when the soil gets waterlogged, the oxygen levels get depleted, and then there's an anaerobic environment. Anaerobic means non-oxygenated. All soils have a microbiome, so there are different microbes living in the soils, and that's a healthy thing for your plant. Your plant does this in nature, coexists with the microbes, and it does it whenever you grow them indoors, outdoors, whatever. But when there's an anaerobic environment in your plant soil from overwatering, what happens is certain microbes that do really well in oxygen depleted environments grow a lot, and they're able to start eating your roots. And that is what causes the roots to rot. So if you allow the soil to stay wet for too long, those microbes, the ones that are anaerobic, they can get a better foothold and take over the microbiome in your plant soil and start destroying your plant's roots. Back to the hydroponic canna, take a look right there. You see that tiny little hair-like structure there? That is a root. So it's tiny, absolutely tiny. Now there are some larger roots in the substrate here, but a lot of the canna's roots are these tiny little hair-like structures. So these tiny roots are very susceptible to root rot. That's why it's very important to keep an eye on your humidity levels in your plant soil. You don't want root rot to take hold. All right, so now how do you tell if you have root rot? Well, take a look at this picture here. So this is a canna plant that I had that I put in a very bad pot. It didn't have very good drainage holes, so water just kind of pooled in the bottom. The plant started to wilt and look a little bit droopy, so I thought I hadn't watered it enough, and I added more water. That was not a good choice. The root rot issue was so bad that the plant, even though it was surrounded by water, wasn't able to actually take in any water because of the damage to the roots. Eventually, the leaves turned crispy and started falling off, and then fortunately, the plant died. What I should have done was try to dry out the soil by repotting it or trying to put a fan on it to evaporate water faster. But if a plant gets to this point, it's most likely too far gone. So what you could do is you could take cuttings of any healthy material that's left over. I have another video for that. I'll put the link in the description of this one. Another surefire sign of root rot are fungus gnats. They eat the decaying roots of your plants. So root rot sets in, your roots rot, and fungus gnats move in to start feasting on your dying roots. These gnats are annoying, but they're also a great indicator of the soil moisture in your plants. If you start to see these flying around, make sure that you take stock of the moisture levels in your plants. Check the humidity of the area that your plants are in, how often that you've been watering them, and whether or not you've been giving them a chance to dry out before subsequent waterings. All right, let's talk a little bit about lighting for your canna plant. Canna can do really well indoors. It seems to like dappled shade though. Look at the shadow of the dog. See how solid it is? Alright, now look under this tree. See how sunlight's sort of still filtering through it? That's what I mean by dappled shade. Take a look at this canna plant. It's doing okay. It'll keep surviving. But this plant I had underneath some of my very strong grow lights, a 100-watt grow light, and I had it about 80% power. I recently moved, so plants kind of took a little bit of a back seat, but look at the browning on the tips there. The skeletonized leaves are okay because Scletum tortuosum, the plant name, Scletum, refers to the skeletonized leaves there. But if you look at some of the yellowing at the tips, that's a good sign that this plant has been a little bit sun damaged. Now, it should probably be able to bounce back, and I could probably trim it and get some new growth going on that would have the familiar vibrant green color of, say, this plant. But this plant's pretty old. It's about 3 years, and I don't want to put it under too much more stress. So what I did is I just lowered the light levels for it. These plants here were a little bit farther away from the grow light. Grow lights, if you're unfamiliar, are usually strongest at the center, and then the light intensity fans out the farther away you get from the center of the grow light. So these were on the perimeter, so they were able to grow pretty well. You can see there's maybe a little bit of damage on the tips of some of these leaves, but they have the skeletonization. This one even put out a flower relatively recently that's now since gone through it. So I just want to demonstrate the difference between too much light, good amount of light. When you're choosing a spot for your indoor canna to grow at, what you want to be looking for is, if you're in the northern hemisphere, look for a south-facing window. If you're in the southern hemisphere, look for a north-facing window. Now, your window should have some dappled shade. It doesn't have to be dappled shade throughout the whole day, but you don't necessarily want your canna to be getting the full day's worth of direct sunlight. That wouldn't be the best thing for it. Now, you can see in this video here, there's pretty strong sunlight coming through. I have south-facing windows and I live in the northern hemisphere, but I don't have any windows that would get dappled shade. So am I in trouble? Is there nothing I can do? Nope. What I can do is make my own sort of shade cloth. This is a kitchen cabinet organizer that I just flipped to be in between the sunlight and the canna plants. You can see it sort of has a mesh there, a mesh screen, and that blocks some of the sunlight. If you take a look at the canna, it looks pretty dappled shade. So this might be what I need to do to make sure that my canna plants get the sort of dappled shade that they want. You could also place it in this sort of orientation too. It doesn't have to be this exact sort of product. You could actually buy shade cloth and make your own little screen for your canna plants. Whatever works. This is just sort of a conceptual showing of this idea. I believe I bought this at a local supermarket for $10 or so, and it should work just fine. Now, what happens if you have the opposite problem? Well, what'll happen is your canna will get leggy. Now that means it'll stretch and stretch and stretch, and it's trying to get sunlight. It's trying to improve its sunlight situation, so it's putting out leaves to try to find some. Now, if you notice that, what you can do is you could invest in a grow light. There's a lot of them on the market. It's going to depend on what your needs are, your budget, all that sort of thing in picking a grow light. So that's an option you can take, but leggy plants are a good indicator that they're not getting enough light. Now remember, just because a south-facing window with no shade doesn't work in my situation, it might actually work in your situation, depending on weather patterns, sunlight intensity. A lot of different parameters go into play with all these plants. So if you want, you could try it out, see if you need to put some sunshades. If your plants start to burn a little bit, you can always experiment a little bit. These plants are a little resilient, so you can have some time to tinker with them, see what works for you and what doesn't. All right, so the last thing I want to talk to you about today is the temperature. So you can see I have this little gauge. I keep this in my grow tent. So the temperature indoors is 75 degrees Fahrenheit. My low for the past 24 hours was 66 and my high was 100. That's probably going to be a little bit different if you're just growing these plants on a desk, that sort of thing, because I open and close my grow tent pretty frequently, and I'm currently working on exhaust systems to flow air through it a little bit better. So I might have some higher spikes in humidity and temperature than you might. You can see my low was 25% humidity and my high was 57. Currently, I'm at 38% humidity. So that's kind of nice because outside, you could have a cold snap and then your plants could get way too cold and then they could die. So it's a good thing if you have your plants indoors that you can have a little bit more control on what sort of environment that they're going through. This also brings me to a little bit of the negatives, or more accurately, the things you have to watch out for when you're growing indoors. So 57% humidity is kind of high, and depending on if your place's humidity is high or low, it really changes the watering frequency. So if you have high humidity, your soil is going to stay wet for much longer than if you're at 25% humidity. So as long as you're taking notes and seeing what sort of soil humidity that you're at with our trick with the toothpick, you should be good. But you don't want to sit in a fixed schedule if you have high humidity and just keep watering and watering. I have found that sometimes indoors your plant soil could stay moist for a little bit longer, so that's something to watch out for. But all in all, you have a lot more control indoors on what your plants are going through. Well, I hope this guide was helpful for you. If you have any questions or comments or anything like that, let me know in the comments. I'll try to answer them. I'm going to be putting out some more videos, probably on hydroponic canna, as well as just a general grow guide. If there's anything that you felt I left out, let me know, and I'll include it in my next video. Thanks for coming along.